most people walk around with a dysfunctional relationship with the present moment. I give a metric for confidence. Just get uncomfortable and do it.
This will make the biggest impact on your family that you can possibly attribute to.
People that are thinking about doing a Your Life Legacy video, do it. Your kids, your grandkids, everyone will thank you. And it just changes the way you look at those that came before you.
The amount of those stories that just go to the ground and are forgotten are endless.
You've got to figure out where people are. Where are they listening? Where are they consuming content? Where are they learning? Where are they buying? We often get in our minds that our life has to be one of balance, of like finding the middle and trying to compromise and thinking like a relationship is 50-50. Like, no, it's not. A relationship is 100-100 all the time.
Welcome back to the Life Legacy Podcast. Today we're with Connor DeHlin, who sincerely is an old soul, full of information, and his public speaking is pretty unreal. He's been on some of the biggest stages that you can be. He recently acquired Full-Time Filmmaker, which is an unreal video production company that has a community of over 150,000 people, right?
Yeah, about 3 million subscribers and followers across social, but of the paid group of students, it's about 150,000 throughout the world.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And I'm just honored to have you on the podcast, and this is definitely someone qualified to inspire you guys at home in the entrepreneurship world, and, you know, just like a very intellectual, knowledgeable human that can add a lot of value. So I'm just happy to bring you on, man, and thanks for coming today.
It's good to be here, Jackson. Let's have some fun.
Yes, sir. Well, to help our audience kind of dive into you, what's kind of your why? What's most important to you right now?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, from the time I was a little kid at 12 years old, if you asked me, what do you want to be when you grow up? I said a motivational speaker, right? Like I just had that vision. But I think really quickly as I, you know, got out of college, was young, realized you don't just go become a motivational speaker without some story. I didn't have any gray hair. Like I wasn't going to go consult any businesses on what they should do at 21, right? And basically got kind of a tip to, hey, go speak for another company. Go out and talk about their products, their systems, their, you know, teachings and trainings. So that's what I did. I spent about 6 years on the road for one of the largest seminar companies in the world. I can talk more about that story in a minute, but I got all this speaking experience. And, you know, by the time I was 26, I had 10,000 hours on stage. Like I'd hit that Malcolm Gladwell number, right? Kind of wild. But I didn't yet know what my message was, like what it was going to be that I was going to give back, how I was going to serve. And really starting in about 2018, 2019, I started my own entrepreneurial journey that took me down the path of content. You know, in today's world, if you have a message, product, service you want to share with the world, you got to be able to use today's platforms to do that. And so I just kind of found myself in the middle of the content game. We started a production studio with my partner, Landon. By the way, that's who we acquired Full-Time Filmmaker with, and he runs the day-to-day there. And then we started a brand called Worth the Follow, WTF, that is basically a sister company to Full-Time Filmmaker. Of, you know, I think what we realized with a lot of people is, man, you can figure out how to use your cameras, how to make it look good, how to make it sound good, but really, what are you going to say? Like, how do you communicate in a way that can connect, in a way that can make a difference? And so that's what we've done now for the last couple of years. We've been training subject matter experts, small business owners in how to tell their story in a way that's building community, that's converting, you know, whatever that looks like for them. And then just put my book out in November of last year, Worth the Follow, the same thing there.
Check it out.
And yeah, it's kind of a lot of my life story, but then a lot of the things that I've taught over the last few years now as we've helped people find their voice and figure out how that translates to today's world.
And like, why do you care to help people, put them on those platforms, share their message properly? Like, why does that matter to you?
I love that. You know, in the dedication of the book, I wrote, if there was one gift that I could give everyone everyone that I meet in this life, it would be confidence. I hope this book gives you the greater sense of your own worth and empowers you to create. And for me, since that time I was a little kid, I was always very externally confident. Like old soul was right. I was like a kindergartner walking into school the first day and like shaking the principal's hand and introducing myself like, "Hi, I'm Connor DeHlin," right? Like externally I had that entertainer vibe. I was comfortable in front of people. But I'll be real, like I didn't always have that confidence internally. And what I realized, as I've gone through my own personal development and my personal growth over the last 5-10 years, it's been a matter of that confidence always has to start from within. And that motivation, that drive, your why, your passion, your purpose has to be found from within. And when that's the order and the sequence, that the internal confidence leads to the external, it's always more fulfilling. It's always greater. So why I really care is I think there are a lot of people that feel a desire to make an impact in the world, to share something that they know is going to leave people better, but they don't necessarily have the confidence in themselves and in what they're doing to stand up or speak out and do it. And so I want to empower and enable those people.
I love that.
Yeah.
I can resonate a lot with that. I've always wanted to just go up to the big leaders and just be like, "Hey, I'm Jackson Cummings. I'm here for
Sure.
whatever you need, and
Yeah.
we'll see each other along the road."
Yeah.
Growing up in school, I was always decently social,
Yeah.
and I always wanted to be the funny guy in the room, which is stupid, but
Yeah. When you try to be funny, that's when you never are, right?
yep,
No
yep.
one would probably use funny as my first description, and that's okay.
My family definitely wouldn't. It's always when I'm not trying to.
Yeah.
Um, and there's a long time, probably from like 12 to 18, where I was always like lighthearted and like I enjoyed. I think I loved and enjoyed my life a ton, but there was that sense of like internal emptiness. And so I'm curious because I know what transitioned for me, and I'll talk about that in a sec, but how do you take someone that, they might like have to flaunt money or, whatever it is to showcase how amazing they are, and internally they feel worthless? Like, how do you take someone like that and have them have a paradigm shift where they realize their value and they can be internally confident?
Yeah. I think it I think it starts with self-love, right? Like when you really can get to a point where you realize that you don't need anything outside of yourself and that the answers lie within, right? I think often when we're kids and we're taught like, well, you've got to do this to have this or you've got to have this to be in this position, it can create you to where you feel like you've got to have these helpers or these external pieces to give you strength or validation or whatever it might be. And so I think it starts with just that recognition that everything you need to be happy is right inside here. Viktor Frankl's like man's search for meaning, right? Like that. It doesn't matter what circumstance or what you're doing, that happiness is a decision that's made from within first. And then when that decision's made, everything in your life, is viewed in that realm. And so I think it's you use the word paradigm shift. I really like that. I think people have to have some sort of wake up call to where you realize, if I'm looking for whatever the next thing is to make me happy or the next accomplishment, that's a battle you will just continually lose over and over again.
And they do it until they're multi millionaires or billionaires and their life is empty, and that feeling of fulfillment or success is not there. I think it's Tony Robbins. He talks about like the ultimate failure is to have everything and feel worthless and not be fulfilled.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I want to help people avoid that at all costs. And talking to a lot of successful leaders, it's around focusing around helping people, service, and being kind of outward of themselves. And in your case, what do you feel like has been beneficial for you?
Yeah, I'll kind of stay on that note. A word that we just said paradigm, but actually, my favorite word I talk about in the book, my favorite word in the English language is paradox. It's two things that are seemingly contradictory or absurd when you looked at them at first glance. Like that seems like it's in opposition of each other, but when you look into it, it actually is true, right? So you actually just said one where you said Tony Robbins, like someone that has it all yet feels like they have nothing, right? And I think we often get in our minds that our life has to be one of balance, of like finding the middle and trying to compromise and thinking like a relationship is 50-50. Like, no, it's not. A relationship is 100-100 all the time, right? Your 100 might look different on one day than someone else's, but it's not ever a compromise of finding the middle. And so for me, like one of my favorite paradoxes is hungry but satisfied, right? So like, we have to live our lives in a place of gratitude for that moment. Like so much gratitude, so much fulfillment, so much happiness in exactly where you are. But then in that same moment, being completely driven and hungry to go after and achieve and accomplish and help and serve or whatever it might be. And those two things aren't compromised. They're 100% all out in both those feelings. And so I think that's when life all of a sudden becomes beautiful, when you realize that that paradox not only like makes sense, it's just how life is and how you want it to be, right? So can you sit there and in the same moment be so grateful for where you're at, but then work so hard for where you want to go?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on that personally.
Yeah, it's never ending.
I thought about this last year, and near the end of the year, I was like, I want to be here, and I've had these goals to be here, and I felt like a little bit short. But at the same time, I was like, if I could go back to myself a year ago and I was like, hey, this is where we're at now,
Yeah,
I'd be pretty pumped.
for
Like,
sure.
I'd be excited. But now that I'm here, I feel like I'm so far behind and things like that. And that's something I personally just need to work on. And it's hard.
Yeah, I think it's built into every achiever, right? Like every driven person, it's that constant battle of those two feelings. But if you don't lean into the gratitude side, if you don't have that perspective that you just had of like a year ago me, if I would have shown him my life, he'd be like, we're on the right path, keep going. And I think the ingredient to that makes it easier is when you realize time does not matter. I think in order to try and achieve stuff in the way we want to, like we naturally put time stamps to it. We want to achieve it by a certain point, but what are you going to do when you get there?
Yeah.
Time's not over anyway, right? And so for me, a large portion of my life, especially when I started my speaking career, like I was 21 when I went out on the road. I mean, initially when I told them I was going to speak, they kind of laughed at me like, you look like you're 16. Like our typical client that we're working with is preparing for retirement, but you're more than welcome to come work the crew, but you're not speaking, right?
Yeah.
So I did that, took that opportunity. 6 months in, a speaker gets sick, right? And we're in Rhode Island. They're in a pinch. I raise my hand. I can do it. I step up in front of 100 people in Rhode Island and do just good enough to get invited back the next week.
Go.
And then one of those things where the next 5-6 years, that's just what I did, right? Day in and day out. But I was very motivated by a lot of that time by my age. Like it was a chip on my shoulder that I always had. Like I was the youngest speaker in the company by 15 years. I felt my youth every time I stood in front of a room, and like I had 2 groups of strangers I had to speak to for 90 minutes every day.
Yeah.
Twice a day, right? And getting in that mindset of like your age, your time, where you think you're at in your career, like it's so fluid. And so when you realize like if there's no finish line, why do I feel like I'm in a race? Live your life.
Live your life. That's interesting, because I've talked with a ton of people where it's like the most valuable thing is their time and where things are going, and then there's the balance of like, hey, just incremental wins throughout. Like you're going to get where you need to go, and I find that really intriguing. Like that's an interesting thing to like dive into.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you have all these interviews with people that are reviewing their life now in the rearview mirror, and they're, toward the end.
Yeah.
And, I doubt many of them are sitting there like, I wish I would have worked harder. I wish I would have gotten that promotion 1 year earlier, or this or that. Like, it's all of, man, I wish I would have known that moment I was in was actually the fun time. I'm actually reading Eckhart Tolle right now, Hit the New Earth. And he basically talks about A New Earth is what it's called. He's also the one that wrote The Power of Now. That's his most famous book. But he talks about how most people walk around with a dysfunctional relationship with the present moment. And he says, if that's the case, you view the present moment as one of three things: either an obstacle, a means to an end, or the enemy. And if that's how you view things, in my end, like, that made me think, because I'm like, yeah, do I view, oh, my career right now, is this a means to an end? Or the phase I'm in this, is this just an obstacle to get to where I want to go? And if that's how you view each day, that's a crappy way to live, right?
Agreed.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to get caught into that because it's just like, all right, the next goal, the next goal.
Yeah.
And one time I was giving a speech about, like, the whole analogy was about our life. We're on a giant hike, but we can choose and look at this hike as if it's a hike in Hawaii, or, like if we're walking in the desert. And it's our perception, and we get to choose and enjoy the part that we're in. But for me, the way that I get into the moment like that, it's always around gratitude and focusing on what's important. And so for you, I'm curious, in the day-to-day world where you're not getting too far ahead of yourself, like what does success kind of look like on a day-to-day basis for you?
It's a really good question, and I think it's always shifting. I'll let you get inside my head right now.
Yeah.
So, I for the last several years, going into each new year, I've taken like 3 days to kind of review the year before, make plans, goals, kind of set out the process for the next year. And this year felt a little different for me because goals weren't resonating. Like these big, oh, I'm going to accomplish this, or I'm going to climb this mountain, or whatever it might be. Like, it just didn't seem to have the same excitement or thrill that it had in the past. And I realized, like, one, it's because I'm really proud of where I'm at right now. Like, of course, it's that hungry, grateful, but it's like exactly what you said. If you would have told 14-year-old Connor, like, this is what you're going to be doing at 30 years old, like, okay, I'd be pumped, right? But what I realized is I've lived a lot of my life in sprints. Like, have a big tasks don't scare me, right? Like, go after it, conquer it, crush it. But then realizing that my pattern over the years has been to, like, knock that big thing off the list or hit the big accomplishment and then drop back down, right? Like, not living my life in sprints rather than a consistent run. And so for me, it was kind of guided by James Clear's Atomic Habits, where it was like, you know what, for the next year, I want to worry way less about the outcome and worry about the process. So I've worked hard to get to where I am right now. I feel I've set myself up really well for what I want to do next. So literally the goals I made this year, I made some very simple goals of, like, daily diligence that I have to do. So for example, like, I wanted to make a true identity shift this year, where something like a mindfulness practice, prayer, meditation, whatever you want to call it, affirmations, incantations, I've had great experiences with that throughout the last 10 years, but I can't say that I've made that a part of, like, I meditate or I pray every single day. Like, I have that stretch. And that sort of commitment scares me, because I'm really good at, like, justifying that I'm good, I've handled this, or I had a good day yesterday, whatever it might be. So I set 2 things that I'm like, I'm going to do this for 365 days, no matter if I'm sick or no matter what. I'm going to have a mindfulness practice for 10 minutes each day, and I'm going to do 100 push-ups each day. Not that 100 push-ups is the key to my physical or whatever, but it was like, that scared me to make a goal that it was like, this thing isn't accomplished if I don't do it every day, right? Because it's a commitment to myself that I want to follow through with. And I just had this overwhelming feeling, like, when you start to go through those changes, but then make it your identity, to where it's like, well, of course you practice that. You don't even think about that anymore. That to me was like my next level up. And then the third piece of that was diligently doing, like, a weekly planning, like reviewing the week before and planning for the week after, and doing that 52 weeks in a row, no exceptions. Like, that's done by 9 a.m. Monday, no matter what. And feeling very confident, like, if you do those things, you can't help but win. So don't worry about what the goal is, because it might take you a cool different way that I couldn't think up right now, but I'll do the little things to help me get there.
I love that.
Yeah.
I'm with you on the meditation stuff. I've done a bunch of breathwork sessions, things like that, and on my weekly goals, I almost always add like, hey, you gotta at least do 1 minute. Give yourself 1 minute to stay still.
Yeah.
And the ones that I've noticed that have been super beneficial for me, I have these 2 meditations that I just came up with.
Okay.
But I put on music that doesn't have any words, so your mind
Yeah.
can just flow. And for about 10 minutes, I think of every past experience in my life that I have loved.
Mm.
And I just let my brain go there.
Yeah.
And then a following day or two, I think and visualize every beautiful experience I'm going to have that will be monumental to
Yeah.
my life. And in both of those, I always end up in tears. I'm not like a big crier,
Yeah.
but like you're getting the best of the best
Yeah.
of what's already happened to what's going to come.
Yeah.
And that has been like a game changer for
Yeah.
me. And if I ever need to kind of reestablish my footing of life, if I'm
Yeah.
in like what you're saying, after you've hit something big and then you're kind of like going down and
Yeah.
you don't want like your energy might be low or something.
Yeah.
That's been one of the more beneficial things
Yeah.
that I've had for those mental practices.
Yeah.
Do you have any
that's
that
totally backed by science right there, right? Because you're not
Mm.
just thinking about it, you're actually feeling it,
Yeah.
right? So like you're tying into those emotions to let that be a part of you. I definitely do things like that in gratitude practice. What's funny too is the more you read like personal development stuff, all this, well, you realize they all say the same stuff.
totally?
But yet we don't do it, right?
Yeah.
Like 2 years ago, I finally read, I was reading all these books, and it was like the 4th book in a row that talked about making a vision board, right? Like old school, cutting the stuff out of a magazine. Obviously, Google Images is a little easier now, but I had never done that. That just
Yeah.
seemed really corny to me, right? And then literally when like the 4th book in a row said it, I'm like, screw it. All right, let's do this,
Yeah.
right? I built what I thought would be my 3 to 5 year plan. And 9 months later, I looked at that board and it absolutely blew me away because I'm like, that's my life. Like that board right there is my life.
Mm.
And so, for example, with something like a vision board, something I've started doing kind of in the second version of that now is some people might make a vision board and they'll go take like a picture of a helicopter or Jeff Bezos's house or some super yacht and this and that. And, if it feels like so unreachable or maybe 20 years out, like I'm not to shoot anyone's dreams down, right? But like if you look at that and it seems so out of reach, then I think it might even be counterproductive, right? Where one, I want to think of everything that I see on there, to me, it's a stretch, but absolutely is doable in the next 3 to 5 years. But then the other thing I started doing is I put things on that board that I have now that I'm really grateful for. Because a couple things happen there. One is you look at the board, you recognize it. There's certain things on the board that you already have that are there. You like, I get that, right? Which makes you feel like, okay, it's not that far away. But then what you're picking up on is the energy of it all. And it doesn't feel like some far off, distant goal. It's like, that's my life. Just different pieces are popping up, in their own timing.
Yeah. You're putting your puzzle together, and
Yeah.
it's like you have some of the old pieces and then you're working for some of the new pieces.
How ungrateful would it be if I made a vision board right now, my vision life, and didn't put anything on there that I currently had?
Yeah.
Like, I love my house right now. Why wouldn't my house be on there,
I love that.
Yeah.
It's something interesting. The first time I did the printouts for my own vision board, so the day it happened, where I went to a library and printed it all out. That same night,
Isn't that funny? No one has printers anymore. You're like, I had to go to a library to find a printer.
I know, it is wild. And that night I came back, and later it's actually the night that my dad passed away. And it was like, so
the night you made your vision board is
Yeah.
the night your dad passed away. Oh my gosh.
so kind of wild. And that just made me think of it. But I had a couple things on there that were pretty mind blowing to me, because like I have a picture of a dad turned around and there's like a sunset, and the dad has a kid on his shoulders. And so it's like me putting out that I'm going to be a good dad. And I'm really excited for that. But as we were going through pictures for my dad and his funeral and stuff, he had almost the exact picture with one of my nephews. And so I see it on my vision board every day still. And it just helps me remember how amazing life is and beautiful moments caught where I get to lean into one. Like I thought it was so special that I had that same exact picture of something my dad accomplished. It's like, oh, I want to be like my dad, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Like
but
got the chills as you said that, man. It's really cool.
yeah, just a beautiful little acknowledgement that, and then I also randomly put like, I want to have this podcast, which I didn't know how or what would happen with that, but like putting it out there, even when it was like, I don't like, I might just go buy a couple things on Amazon and have the most ghetto podcast ever. But then I found, an amazing business partner, Tommy Moore, who's, this setup is a lot of money and it's a lot of high quality things, and
Yeah.
that's why you look so good. No, just kidding. You
That's
look
right.
good.
All fake.
No, but it's cool when you push yourself and you put that out there. But I really love the like take the gratitude of the life that you've already been creating and mesh it all together.
Yeah. Now, I think that story you told is really cool, and I would point out that that moment with your dad wouldn't have happened if you hadn't taken the chance to slow down and get intentional, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, I think those moments, they're always all around us, but most of us just aren't paying enough attention. And we don't give it the time to get quiet or to be intentional enough to actually do a practice like that. And when you do, of course, those moments are all over. I don't think it's the fact that they're there now. It's the fact that you're aware of them, that you're awake to them, that you're seeing them. My girlfriend, my person, soon to be a whole lot more. She lost her son. So her first little boy she lost in a drowning accident, 2.5 years old, and this was before I knew her. So I didn't know that little boy, but obviously have a partner that is, that is a major part of her story. And grieving, that's a process that's never over, and it is absolutely crazy how much I've learned from watching her go through that and be there for her. And that little guy is so active in her life, and
That won't
in
ever
our
change.
lives, right?
Yeah.
But it's because she pays so much attention to it and she's so aware. She said something to me one day that I'm like, do you realize what you just said? Like the power of that statement. And she said, I keep asking for signs and I keep getting them. And like, the truth in that statement of like, if you just keep asking and keep pushing, like you're going to continually get the nudge from the other side, or the direction, or the counsel, or the support, or the comfort, or the peace, whatever it might be. But often we just don't ask for it, and we don't slow down and get quiet enough to recognize it.
I love that.
Yeah.
And everyone handles their grief different. I cannot imagine being one of the people that won't talk about it. Like, and for anyone that is like that, I just don't understand that. But that doesn't mean it's good or bad. But I think what you were saying kind of made me think of the reticular activating system. It's something in our brain that helps us realize what's really important to us. Like right now, as you're watching this podcast or listening to it, your brain is filtering out millions of things that you're seeing or thinking of to make sure that you can focus.
Yeah.
And so when you bought that sweet car that you're driving, I bet you were able to notice after that how many more of those you just see around.
Sure.
Which there's still probably not too many of them. But so like anyone at home, whatever car you're driving, you probably realize how many more are on the road now because of that. And it's just because it's now something that's important to you and it's a part of your life.
For sure.
And so your brain takes that into account. And so if you want to be more intentional and like you ask for these signs and these miracles, like what your girlfriend does, it's going to be more aware because you've told your brain and your reticular activating system that this is important. And so just a thought I had that I want to share.
Yeah. I love it.
Let's talk about like your love for history a little bit. Like,
Okay.
where did that come from? I love it too a little bit, but I think you're a lot deeper into it than me.
Yeah, I've always loved history, and I think especially in the last few years, we're kind of out of it now, but there was that like kind of erase history, like cancel culture movement that I really think took on, and that to me was really frightening because like history is simply, hey, take a look at other people that have experienced hard things or been through challenges. What happened to them? How did that turn out? Like, we have the ability to look at history with that hindsight and be able to learn from them, right? And so while like, if history's ugly or the things you don't like about it, that's all the more reason to study it, right? To recognize patterns, to recognize how you can, make changes or improvements that are going to benefit you. But for me, my love of history started with knowing my set of great grandparents. And this is why I'm a huge fan of Your Life Legacy, like, because it's something like that 20 years ago got me onto loving history, but also taught me how to connect with the generations that came before us. So it's interesting. Like, I come from a long line of oldest. I'm the oldest. My mom's the oldest. My grandpa's the oldest. My great grandparents, which meant that as the oldest great grandchild, like, I was lucky enough to have my great grandparents live into their 90s when I was in my 20s, right? Wow. And so they were around. And my great grandparents were a part of the greatest generation. They, ruled the Great Depression. They graduated in the class of 1940. And so for those of you that know, like, World War II started in 1941. He fought in the war, part of the time in Hawaii, part of the time in Europe. And in 6th grade, I was given an assignment that was a year-long project. The year-long project was basically that you needed to find someone over the age of 65, and you needed to interview them once a month, and there were all these different categories to interview them. So, like, straight up what Your Life Legacy does, very similar, right? From like their birth to their childhood to holiday traditions to college, and basically had this whole year of interviews, and then you wrote reports after every interview, right? So I was lucky enough I didn't have to go to some senior home and find a stranger. Like, I did this with my great grandma and grandpa, Bill and Lorna. And
So amazing.
I am so, so grateful for those conversations. And being able to sit with them and just listen to their life and what they're about. And all of a sudden, I'll just give you a quick little recap of their story because it's literally something like it could be in a movie, right? So, class of 1940, there's a group of boys that come to Spanish Fork High School right here in Utah, and the National Guard comes to them basically with a promise. And they told these high school boys, hey, look, tensions are getting crazy over in Europe, right? There might be another war, right? Hopefully not like the Great War that happened 20 years ago, World War I, right? But anyway, they said, if you join the National Guard and give us 2 years, you won't have to go abroad. You won't go overseas. So they take the deal. Good deal, right? They go off to boot camp, and they're just kind of enjoying, basically about to finish up these 2 years. And then during that time, Pearl Harbor is bombed. The U.S. enters the war. Well, what they didn't say was that if we actually declare war, the promise is off the table, and who's going to go first to war? Those that are in the National Guard already trained, right?
Oh my gosh.
My great grandma, they were friends in high school, but never like romantically involved. But then that actually kind of changed once they left high school and he was at boot camp. They started writing like love letters to each other, and just like this 1940s old school love story that starts. And then basically he gets orders to go to Hawaii like 2 months after Pearl Harbor, and they're waiting in Pearl Harbor for the next attack, right? War. Like, Hawaii was not a safe place to be. And so my great grandpa writes home to my great grandma. They basically going over letters like, we want to get married. Let's do this. He had a 3-day leave before he's supposed to go off from San Francisco, get on a ship to go to Hawaii. And my grandma and her mother get on a Greyhound bus and meet my great grandfather and his best friend, who was one of his buddies in the war, to meet at the halfway point in Reno, Nevada to get married. They meet in the halfway point in Reno, Nevada. They're supposed to then have a day after of this day honeymoon before he goes off. 15 minutes after the wedding actually happens, they get orders that their ship's going out a day before now.
my
There's been a
gosh.
shift. So literally they spend 2 hours together, don't even enjoy a wedding night. So I'll let your viewers fill in the dots there, and basically get back on Greyhound buses. She's coming back to Utah. He's going to San Francisco. They don't see each other for the next 2.5 years.
Oh my gosh.
He's in Hawaii the whole time. They're married, having just building more and more of a relationship over letters. He then comes back in 1944 to go to officer training, and basically has 3 months in Mississippi. And she goes and joins him out in Mississippi while he's in officer training. First time they've lived together, right? They're now experiencing this.
Gosh.
And by the end of that three months officer training in 3 months officer training in Mississippi, he's an officer and she is pregnant. And then he's sent off to Europe. So he's sent off for Europe for another year. Some crazy things happen. He's actually ends up not in battle, but a bomb going off on their tank. He's blown off the tank. Several other guys in his group die, and he ends up waking up with his dog tags blown off in a hospital in France. On the other side of the world, at the same time, my grandma is having her son, and they're having their first baby together. And when she had the baby, he was MIA. MIA, missing in action, typically turned into KIA at that time, killed in action. And so she thought that he wasn't there when they gave birth. And that little boy that was born in the hospital is my grandpa. And he was fine. Like my great grandpa came back about 6 months after the war, met my grandpa when he was a year old. But that shifted for me, because that's not history. Like, that's my story. Right. And all of those decisions and everything they did and all of those hardships, like, that's built into me and my DNA. And that at an early age just shifted it for me, because suddenly, like, it started with World War II history because I could connect to it. But then it doesn't take much longer to just take another generation, 2 or 3 back. And it's not history. It's our story. It's your story. These are our parents, grandparents. And so when you look at it, like, history at the end of the day, we tell it with this perfect lens, but life was hard. And I think for me, as I've grown up, some of these figures like a George Washington or Abraham Lincoln, we put them on pedestals. We revere these people. They're heroes to us. But for me, as I've gotten older, I've taken them off the pedestal, but I actually respect them even more, because when I look at George Washington, he was a man that just had a really, really hard life, that went through some incredibly tough things, that was a visionary, that led people around him. And yeah, he wasn't perfect. None of us are perfect, but that makes me feel so much better to know that he wasn't, right? Yeah. And then, to hear from our great-grandparents or grandpas. And so people that are thinking about doing a Your Life Legacy video, do it, because your kids, your grandkids, everyone will thank you. And it just changes the way you look at those that came before you. And it doesn't require much imagination to take their lessons and apply them directly to your life.
That story is so mind-blowing.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
And they're just telling me at breakfast over there, I'm like, wait, well, hold up. This isn't a movie? Like, you did this? You're like, yeah, we did it. I mean, she went home and had a wedding reception without him, with a picture of him on the grand piano. And she said, our wedding reception felt more like a funeral than a wedding, right? And I'm like, my great-grandparents are badasses, right? Like, how much, he comes home from the war, goes to USC school, dental school on a GI Bill, first person in his family to get any sort of higher education, and changed a cycle of poverty, of struggle that has a direct impact on me, right? And so what that then places me in a mode of is so much gratitude, because I realize that I'm starting my life from a completely different place that they are because of them. Yeah. And so thank you, right? Like, thank you to those. And so now, like, how can I just take this baton and keep going and live for their legacy and create mine, and just all feel that?
It's amazing. That's amazing for so many reasons. First thing that came into my head was, like, we think long distance relationships are hard now. Like, are you kidding me? Can you imagine?
Letters.
And then second, there was this study that was done that is so mind-blowing to me, and I learned this only a couple months ago, but they did a study across the US, thousands of kids. It was a pretty huge study where they were trying to see what makes a child strong, what makes a family strong.
Mm.
And above having both parents in the home, above higher education, above location, so like what everyone has
Sure.
thought to be the most important things, it showed the number one thing that helped a kid have self-assurance, let's see, uh, higher happiness and a higher, happier family. And well, let's see, I'm just going to restate this one because this is worth
I
it.
love it.
So it was to see what makes a child strong, a wide study with thousands of children across America. The number one predictor of a child having self-assurance, emotional resilience, high functionality of a family, and happiness of a family and children was knowing their own family history and their own family story. And that doesn't mean like you need to go back thousands of years, but
No.
literally your story is a perfect example of just knowing what your grandpa or your great grandpa's love story, a little bit of what they've gone through. Those are the things that build a human for success. And so when I found that, I was like, oh my gosh, this
Yeah.
is the most validating new information for our company. That's amazing. But
Yeah.
also, these researchers were completely mind blown. It's Robin Five-ish, if you want to go look it up. But they changed their entire career because how unbelievable this study was. And so if you want to make a difference for your family, if you're a child listening to this and you have grandparents, or you're an older person and you have parents that are still around, or you're, in some of your last stages of your life, like this needs to be done. One, for your own sake, like to keep and get all the gems of your life in order. But two, this will make the biggest impact on your family that you can possibly attribute to. And another study that I love, it's also kind of hard to realize, but on average, even if someone's made a giant impact, like your great grandpa, like the amount of those stories that just go to the ground and are
Yeah.
forgotten are endless.
Yeah.
And so that's why Your Life Legacy was started, because the average human with a great life story, if it's not captured after 1 to 2 generations, they will just be forgotten.
Yeah.
And that's what we're here to fight.
I
We
love
need
that.
to have those captured. And this is just like a perfect example of what it can do to a human soul
Yeah.
and how it can make you push to be hungry
Yeah.
and be grateful for your life.
Yeah. Do you know how proud it made me feel to be able to write my grandparents' story in my book? And to know that, like, there are only a couple pages of that, but I included that story in there because I wanted that to be set in stone, right? I wanted the permanence of that.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that you do really well at your company is you don't seek to tell these stories in a way that puts really rose-colored glasses on it and tells them as perfect beings, and again, putting people on a pedestal, because I actually think that sometimes could do more harm than good, right? We joke about George Washington. If George Washington is this man who's almost godlike, who has his face carved into a mountain and chops down a cherry tree, I can't connect to that.
Yeah.
But the moment I see that, man, he struggled, he had problems, he made some bad decisions, he learned, he bounced back, he hit his groove in his 70s or whatever it might be, like that is so comforting to me. And now take that a step closer when that's your grandpa, right? Yeah. It doesn't help a kid to know that your grandpa was perfect. He never made a mistake. His life was amazing. What's your problem, kid?
Yeah, it's,
right?
It's actually detrimental.
Totally. Instead, you go, oh, man, my grandpa was just like me. And he showed, man, my grandpa was 22, somewhat 1.2. And that, I think, humanizing effect of those that came before us, it's not disrespectful, right? In fact, it ties us together. And then, like, what a cool way to invite the spirit and the energy and the life and the legacy of those who came before us into your everyday. Like I'm really lucky to have great relationships with both my grandpas and my great grandpa, who I just told you about. And all three of them, when I think about them today, all three are gone. They all represent different traits to me, different values. And I want to incorporate all of those best pieces of them into me. I'm still different, right? Like I kind of feel sometimes like they're probably watching my life a little jealous sometimes. You're like, oh, I wish I would have tried that. Like I want to take my own course. That's awesome. But what they did, how can I help, let them experience what life is like in 2025 through me too? Because I know they're a part of it. I know they're right there with me.
Yeah, that's cool to continue your legacy and feel like your ancestors get to enjoy it too. I like that a lot.
Yeah. And if you think about it, like, when I really got to the core of like, okay, what do I believe? I think for anyone in life, we're given certain set of core beliefs or values or standards because we're just taught by those that are around us. But I think no matter when you have it in your life, everyone faces that point where it's like, well, what do I believe? And when I stripped away everything and I gave myself permission to ask that question, the place that I landed at first was, you've got to ask, well, who am I? Right? I'm not this body. I'm not the person having these crazy thoughts. Like I'm the one in here experiencing this. And I believe that spirit, that soul, whatever you want to call it, existed before it came into this body in this life, and it'll exist after. That was the foundational belief that to me, it was just like, I believe that. Like I know that. And so if I existed before, of course we were along for the ride when my great grandpa was off in Europe fighting World War II. Like, of course I was watching that. Of course I was learning. Of course I wanted to be a part of that. So why wouldn't he now be like, wonder what life would have been like with an iPhone? Like, this is crazy. Well, guess what? He can experience that through me. And so the more you get to know those that came before you, the more involved they get in your life. And then on the flip side, then it gets a little crazy. This whole circle of life thing is like, there are people coming after us that are so active in our lives right now and care so much. And like, I know when I was up a spirit, doing whatever I was doing, I was really, really interested in what my great grandpa was doing in the 1940s, right? Because I knew that what he did then, and making sure he came home and didn't, end up being one of the ones blown up in that tank that day, that was going to have a direct effect on my life. And so you better believe I was watching with real intent, rooting.
Dude, I can tell this is something you're insanely passionate about.
Yeah.
And we share that, and our experiences have been different with it, but it was so beautiful getting to do my grandparents' documentary. My grandpa had actually already passed, but I was able to learn so many new things where it shifted who I am. I have one grandpa on a side that is like such a hard freaking worker, and then I have this other one that was just a baller in business, and and like the mix of those two, it's in my identity. And I think some of the older generation, they have this thought process of to come across perfect. It's like we have to be the example. We can't let the future generations see into maybe where we made some mistakes. But vulnerability is what brings together and connects, and that's why you feel that connection when you learn some of these little hardships that they went through, or maybe mistakes or screw ups. And science has actually proven it now that the trauma that is unhealed in our great grandparents and grandparents actually gets passed on through DNA, where sometimes we'll have certain reactions from trauma that's not even ours. And if we don't know what they've experienced, it's pretty damaging to us, because we get affected by it in our own DNA, which I don't understand the ins and outs of that, but there's tons of studies if you want to look up DNA and trauma, like
generational trauma.
Trauma, it's a real thing, and it's just wild. But I want to give you a sec to tell us some things about your book
Yeah.
and how you want it to benefit people.
Yeah. It's funny. I think communication has always been just a non-negotiable trait that leaders have had to have, right? If you have something you want to share with the world, whether that's a business, a product, a service, a message, an idea, a story, you want to build a community, a nonprofit, whatever it is, your ability to communicate that is everything. And real communication that actually has value and drives impact isn't just inspiring. It's not just entertaining or motivating or uplifting or, oh, I didn't know that. It moves people. It literally gets people to move. It gets them to take action. Like I always say, you can't create a movement without movement, right? Like you've got to get people going. And then, so that was kind of the first angle of, one thing that I had to learn early on as a speaker is I spoke at events where I was selling training and selling education, right? Literally people, it wasn't applause that were meaning if I did a good job or not at 21 years old. It was if they purchased what I was talking about, right? And I am so grateful that that's how I started my speaking career, because what it taught me is that, man, if all I did was just go around and tell stories or get people to laugh, or if they clapped for me, it was a win, that wouldn't have set me up now to make the kind of impact that I want to have. So really the focus of the book and what we try to help people with at my company now, WTF Media Network, is, okay, how do we communicate in a way that's going to get people to move? So that's the first part. Like, how do we convert, whatever a conversion looks like for you? And don't act like that's just a salesy thing, because it doesn't matter what you're doing. Yep. You're trying to nonprofit and build a community. You got to get people to jump on board, right? So that's the first piece. But then the second piece is leaders have had to figure out how to communicate on the platforms of their day. And so, like, I give this example. If you look at just presidents in the United States, 1930s, FDR, he was known for his fireside chats, right? He spoke and people listened to it on the radio, right? That was the medium that people were using. The vehicle was the radio. And FDR was in a wheelchair, right? It fit him. He was able to do that. If he'd come around 30 years later, I would bet you that in a time of World War, America wasn't rooting for someone that they couldn't see walk, right? Definitely. But he knew how to communicate in that way. Presidential election of 1960, JFK and Richard Nixon, first televised presidential debate. And Richard Nixon blew it off. He was sick. He looked ashy. He looked mean and grumpy on stage. And JFK knew that he needed to look tan. He needed to look likable. He needed to look full of life and zest. And for some reason, when he talked to the camera, people connected to it, right? Fast forward to 2008, President Obama, he figured out how to use Facebook. The first president that figured out, hey, let's use social media. And who came out in droves for Barack Obama? Younger people. Like, he got that generation. 2016. Trump figured out how to use Twitter to literally dominate the news cycle. And he had large news stations reporting on what he was tweeting, right? And so my point is, you've got to figure out where people are. Where are they listening? Where are they consuming content? Where are they learning? Where are they buying, right? And how do you win there? So if you can get people to move, and then you can get people to move and actually communicate well on the platforms you're on, that's the win, right? And so now I think where this has shifted, now we're, my company, we're a content production company where we do full-on content production for people. We'll do the consulting, but also teaching people, like anyone younger that's listening right now, you have to be comfortable in front of a camera. It's just a non-negotiable anymore. So like, get comfortable now putting your phone in selfie mode and talking to the camera. Get comfortable sitting down in a podcast setting like this with the lights on in a weird spot. It might be intimidating for you. Learn how to do it, because it's not going anywhere, right? And so figuring out some of those basics of how can you have confidence, how can you have clarity, it's required now that you're so much more succinct in how you speak, because our attention spans are so much shorter, right? Where, I mean, here we are doing an hour podcast, but like most people will feel a moment here in a 60-second clip that's pulled from this podcast, 1000%. Right? And how can you speak there? How can you share the power of your life legacy in 30 seconds, enough for someone to go, okay, tell me more?
Yeah.
right? Number one rule of show business, leave them wanting more. And that's what you've got to figure out today to be a leader that's going to communicate and get people to move. So that's what the book's about. That's what my company does. It's kind of fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can tell your speaking abilities are amazing. And
Thanks, man.
I'm with you. Like, it took me a while to feel any type of comfort in this type of situation where there's lights, cameras. I'm used to doing the interviewing where it's like my job is like to make sure that I'm not even in their video documentaries or anything, to now having to give insight and adding value as well.
Yeah.
It's a cool journey, but it takes reps. So
Yes.
I think a solid invitation, what you were just saying, is like put in the reps and get used to it, get comfortable. This is the future. Like this is like the currency. Attention is the currency, and that's how you're going to become valuable as a human, as a leader. If you're trying to do something that involves storytelling and a voice, which is almost anything that you need.
Yep. Yeah, I think you're spot on. In the book, I give a metric for confidence, and I use RPM, that acronym, right? But it's reps, preparation, and mindset. So reps to me is actually where it starts. Like, go put yourself, just get uncomfortable and do it, right? Like, put yourself out there and feel it. And then the preparation, that's not necessarily like reps are where you get the practice. Preparation is when you show up to practice, are you ready? Or when you show up for that rep, what have you thought through? How much more prepared are you? Like as a speaker, the more prepared you are, the more ability you have to be free and loose and off the cuff, right? It's when you're not prepared that doesn't work, right? Yeah. So it's crazy as you see these people like practice so that they can get up and go with the flow, right? And then mindset, obviously, just being in that right headspace when you show up, you know, like if you're not in the right spot, that's not going to come across. But I really think that's where you can boost that confidence, and that's where it's not fake it till you make it. It's like, no, I've been here before. And then recognizing nerves are never going away. All nervousness is energy that doesn't know what to do in your body. You're feeling emotion, you're feeling energy. And of course, because it's a big moment, it's exciting. There are people watching you. Of course, your body's having some sort of reaction. So it's not, oh, do you get nervous? Like that question gets asked to me all the time. I'm like, honestly, I don't think it's a very good question. Of course, I feel nerves. But how do you know, oh, this is what this feels like when it comes up, when I have a big moment. And here's how I channel it. Here's how I control it. For me, it's excitement. I can't in practice be as good as I could be as I'm on stage because I can't fake those nerves. I rely on those nerves to help me show up as my best. And that's why I know if I'm an 8 out of 10 in practice, I'll be a 10 out of 10 in person because I've put in the reps, I've done the preparation, my mindset's in the right spot. Now you give me that little boost of nerves and I've just flipped that to be a positive. Right? This conversation wouldn't have been as exciting if you and I were just talking on the couch because those nerves wouldn't have kicked up. But my excitement, energy level's higher right now because the cameras are on, the lights are on. This is fun. Boom, flip into that mode. And that's what you've got to teach yourself, right? And that's how you show up in the big moments and nail it.
There you go. I will say something. Every conversation we've had, I've felt you give your energy. Like you give your 100% in what you're doing. And it's actually just, it's super cool to see it because I've seen people in all, you know, when they're on, when they're off and that, and it's like, I feel you give it. And I appreciate that a lot.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. Like when, you know, for those, I know a lot of people listen to this podcast that are entrepreneurial, right? I've had my times where I've been low energy. And that is a really, really good sign that you need to find something else, right? What you do, what you're passionate about, what lights you up should give you energy. Now, that doesn't mean go quit your day job. Like if you're bored with what you're doing, quit. But no, like start to play around and find the things. Use that energy as a compass to show you where you're being drawn to. And that's different for everyone, right? But when you start to feel, what are those things that light you up? What gives you the jitters a little bit? What scares you a little bit? Use fear as a compass and head right towards that and see what happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in my weekly planning, a big part that's really important to me is I write down what gets me excited.
Oh, I love that.
And like it doesn't have any direction. It's just like what actually gets me excited. And it always comes down there's like 5 go-tos where it's like I always love traveling. I always love looking forward to marriage. I always love influencing others to help their world in whatever shape or form that looks like. And I love getting the gems of people's stories in their lives captured. Like, I think those are so good. And then just trying to be a follower of God, whatever that looks like, those things like fire me up.
Yeah.
I'm fueled by them.
Yeah.
And then every once in a while, I'll have to throw in a couple other ones. That's like,
Sure.
and then it's good. I love that you said it's like, it's good to steer towards fear because there's normally something there that's going to be adding a lot of benefit to you. So I like that a lot.
Yeah.
I want to hear, for you, say tomorrow was your last day. What's the legacy that you want to leave behind to, future kids, to, those that come? What would that be for you?
It's a good question. And that question is actually one that sparked quite a bit of soul searching for me a few years back. Probably about 4 or 5 years ago that I asked myself that question, and maybe I was a little hard on myself at the moment, but I'm like, if people were to go to my funeral right now, I think they would list off a lot of really, really cool things I've done. And I've done cool things. I've been all over. I've spoken at this. I've done, but I realized, like, for me, I didn't feel like at that moment in my life I'd had enough I would have enough people that said, man, Connor changed my life, or he made me feel this way, or he helped me in this moment, or whatever it might be. And that really led to a shift in me. Of course, like, I'm a collector of experiences. I say yes when life sends stuff my way. Like, it's why I go run with the bulls. It's why I've done crazy stuff like that. But that's not what matters at the end. Like, for me, the shift has been in people. And, like, my question of, did I live a legacy, is who showed up at my funeral and what did they say? And did I make an impact directly to them, to their life, in their own confidence, in their own happiness, in their own fulfillment? Did I help them on their path, or whatever it might be? And that was the shift. So I think for me, I plan to make massive impact in this world. And I want to have people that I made a massive impact on their life that I maybe never even met.
So cool.
Yeah.
I like that. And I like how you've thought deeply about it. And yeah, it's a thing that everyone should care about, but until you have like a timeline with illness or something, it's really easy to just shake off and keep going.
Yeah.
But I can say for me personally, our few conversations, you're someone that I look up to a lot, to the point where I'm like, I want you to come to a board meeting.
Thanks. I'm excited for that, by the way.
And so I wouldn't say like you're on track. I think you're just doing it. You're already there. So yeah, keep up with what you're doing, and I highly respect who you are as a person. And before we end this, is there anything you would want to say to our audience?
Yeah, first off, to you, congratulations on what you've built. And I love founders that have a really, really strong why behind what they started. And your story is fascinating in that you had the idea, you felt you needed to do it, and then had, tragedy and a moment hit that all of a sudden was all the confirmation in the world you need, and you haven't stopped with that. So good for you. Keep going on that. And, what I would just urge you to do is tell that story everywhere you go.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, don't just tell that story and let the rest take care of itself, because it will. And the second piece is what you're doing is making lives better, like countless. And you might just see the immediate people that watch it right now, but you're not going to know the full extent of the work that you're doing and what you're doing for your clients for generations to come. They're going to have to figure out however the cloud's going to work in 60 years. Like, I think about it. We would have done this on a VHS. If you gave us a VHS right now, we're like, how do we watch this dang thing? They're going to figure out how to watch it, right? And it's going to make an impact way after we're gone. So keep that up. I love that. And then I think just to the audience, like, hey, when you feel those moments of clarity, of energy, of a push to go follow a dream or a passion, don't ignore that. Right now, don't turn your dream into what has to pay the bills on day one, because then it doesn't become a dream anymore. It becomes a job, right? Figure out how to grow that at the beginning without giving up your safety net, because you can. Right? You don't necessarily have to jump at that first thing. Start building it now. So if you have a dream, if you have a passion that's been kicking around in the back of your head, ask yourself, what steps can you take without making big life changes right now? Because they're there. And then start doing those things. And as you do, I promise you the other steps will continue to show themselves.
That's awesome. I love that a ton. I like the jump. I'm a big risk taker, and there's the pros and cons of that for sure.
You could handle your worst case scenario, right? You thought that through. Yeah.
And everyone at home, just know that we love you. Very grateful for all your help and support and all that's going on in life to help others become better people, and whatever we can do to help your world. Reach out, leave comments, leave reviews. Connor, you're unreal.
Thanks, man.
Very grateful for our friendship, and
reach out to me on social. I'd love to talk to you if you listen to the episode.
Yeah. And where can they find you?
Easiest way is just my social. I'm the only Connor DeHlin in the world. You can see it spelled there on Instagram and all that in the show notes. And then if you want to check out the company, either go to connordehlin.com or WTFnetwork.com. And WTF is worth the follow. Get your minds out of the gutter, right? We planned that one.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's a podcast.